Today on Face the Nation, will New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg run for president? The mayor fueled the speculation fire when he quit the Republican Party to become an independent last week. Could he be the Ross Perot of 2008? And is the country ready for a third party? These are the questions for an all-star political roundtable. Sam Waterston, actor and spokesman for Unity 8, the group that wants to form a third party. Former New York Mayor Ed Koch, former Perot campaign manager Ed Rollins, and John Harris of Politico.com. I'll have a final word on why Face the Nation didn't get the Big Get interview. But first, Bloomberg and will he run on Face the Nation?
Face the Nation with CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
And good morning again. Joining us from our New York studio, the former mayor of New York, Ed Koch, political consultant Ed Rollins, and with us from Hartford, Connecticut this morning, Sam Waterston. Here in the studio, John Harris of Politico.com. We're here to talk about third parties this morning and the chances of third-party candidates. Sam Waterston, I want to go to you first. You are not a politician. You're not running for anything. You're an actor on Law & Order, which coincidentally happens to be the place where Fred Thompson works. I guess on Law & Order, he's actually your boss, but we'll talk about that in a minute. What I want to talk to you about this morning is what you are trying to do as the spokesman for Unity 08, which is a group that is trying to find a way to get a third-party candidate on the ballot in 50 states. I guess I'll ask the basic and obvious question, why do we need a third party?
Well, I think the basic inspiration for Unity 08 is the fact that the system itself for choosing our leaders is broken, and everybody knows it. 57% of the people are now welcome the idea of a third-party candidate, while the Congress and the president compete with the low 20s. So the other thing is that this presidential campaign is unlike any in almost 100 years. It's very, very open. So there's a very large opportunity. But the basic thing to insist on is that the system for choosing is broken, and that the people who have helped the system to evolve to the place that it is today are not well placed to clean it up.
Well,
and
would Michael
just on a
Bloomberg,
personal note,
would Mike Bloomberg, who announced this week that he's an independent, would he be the kind of guy, would he be your kind of guy? Is this what you're looking at?
well, he certainly would, and it is one of the names that has been talked about in regard to Unity 08. The thing is that the people in an online convention will decide who the candidate is going to be. So it's not for me or anybody else to anoint a candidate, but certainly Bloomberg is a very likely one. And it seems to me that it's very telling about the condition of the process right now that he would choose to become an independent. Having tried being a Democrat and having tried being a Republican, he's a very competent, very able, very successful mayor, and he's chosen to be an independent.
Well, let me ask you this. Our whole system is really designed to discourage third-party candidates. The hard part for any third-party candidate is going to be to get on the ballot in all 50 states. Do you think you can do that?
Unity 08 is well aware.
Can you do that?
Well, Unity is well aware of the hill that it has to climb, and it's a large hill, but it's not impossible.
All right. Well, let's go next to...
And we're working on it already.
All right. Let's go next to Ed Rollins. Ed, you, of course, were the political director in Ronald Reagan's White House. You were a long-time Republican strategist. And then when Ross Perot decided to make an independent run, you and Hamilton Jordan, if memory serves, who had been Jimmy Carter's chief of staff in his White House, came together and were going to manage Ross Perot's campaign. You write today in the Washington Post that there was a great deal of difference between Ross Perot and Michael Bloomberg. What's the difference?
Well, first of all, Ross had never been through the experience of running any kind of a campaign, and he repeatedly said, I don't want to run a conventional campaign. I've got all these volunteers out there, and together we're going to get on the ballots, and we're not going to do it in a conventional way. Well, at the end of the day, I tried to explain to him over and over again that the conventional way was you had to communicate with voters. There were millions of voters out there beyond his volunteers who were interested in a third-party candidate. When we started that campaign, he was at 39%, leading both President Bush and Bill Clinton. Substantially, day by day that evaporated because of his inability to communicate effectively what he was about. I think the country, and I'm a Republican, I'm still a Republican, I'll continue to be a Republican, and I'll support someone in my party, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's a bad thing to have someone else in the process, and I certainly don't think it's a bad thing to have someone like Mike Bloomberg who can self-fund and basically talk about major issues bothering voters in this country. And more Americans today, and particularly young people, aren't choosing either party. They say they're an independent, and they want to stay an independent, and they want independent choices.
But the hard thing, of course, is the process, getting on all those ballots. Do you think that's doable?
It's doable. It's extremely difficult. Someone with Bloomberg's resources can do it, and I think Unity 08 will prove that it can. Pat Buchanan and others have done it in the past, but it's not easy. It should be easier. It's one of the. We've had the two-party system for a long period of time, and to a certain extent, those people operate the state Secretary of State's offices and what have you and make it difficult. So one of the things that Bloomberg or Unity 08 or what have you can do is certainly make it easier. And I think to a certain extent there's sometimes a time and a place when someone beyond the two parties may be what's necessary to lead the country.
Well, let's go to former New York Mayor Ed Koch. If ever there were a person who could be described as an independent thinker, I think we'd all agree that would be Ed Koch. Just as an example, he was a Democratic mayor, but broke with the Democrats and supported Bush, President George Bush, last time out. Mr. Mayor, what about all these New Yorkers are running? What will be the impact? And we should say that at this point, you have announced you are supporting Hillary Clinton in the primaries.
But without any question.
But what about the impact of Mike Bloomberg right now? Even if he doesn't get into it, isn't this going to have an impact on this race?
Either way, but more so, of course, if he gets into it. And I personally believe he will be running, and I don't think there will be a problem in getting on the ballot in the 50 states. Nader did it. Ed Rollins' candidate did it, and Bloomberg has 18 times more funds available than any of those people did. I will hope to hear him discuss what has not been yet discussed by him, which would be international affairs, and I will choose at the time of choice that person who will be best for the country, irrespective of party. I know it's not going to be a Republican because they're dead.
Well, is what you're saying here that while you've announced you're going to support Hillary Clinton in the primaries, that if Bloomberg should get into it, you'll reevaluate?
I will consider what he has
Really?
to say. Yes, of course. Listen, first, I'm not an apparatchik. I'm not even involved in any way in the campaign. I was in the first Senate campaign. In fact, I did a commercial that won a prize for Hillary, and I really like her, and I think she will be the next president of the United States, and if she is, she will do a superb job. But that doesn't mean I can't listen to an independent candidacy if it, in fact, occurs. It may not even occur, so I don't have to make that decision.
All right.
I'm, at this point, hopeful that she will be, and believe she'll be the Democratic candidate, and she will win in the general.
All right. Well, let's turn now to John Harris, who's the editor-in-chief of Politico.com, which, of course, is the all politics, all the time political website. What do you make of this, John?
Well, first off, let's take it in the most positive sense. These guys are onto something, and the reason they're onto something is the country at large is not as partisan as Washington is. Sam Waterston quoted that Newsweek poll. 57% of Americans say they think the two-party system is not working to solve the nation's problems. Big states. California is a Republican presidential state, a Democratic presidential state, but Arnold Schwarzenegger very popular. Arizona, Governor Napolitano is the opposite situation. She's a Democrat winning. So there's clearly an opportunity there for a politician who can say, look, we can solve problems and transcend partisan politics. That's the upside. The downside, obviously, history. Nobody has done this. I must also say I'm skeptical. The big issue facing the country in 2008 is not one of process, the idea that the system itself is broke. The big question facing voters in 2008 is the war. That's not a process question, that's an issues question. Getting into the war was a bipartisan act. Now it's highly partisan, but it's not partisan over process, it's partisan over principle. So this isn't quite the same context that Ross Perot ran in 1992, winning 20% of the vote. So we'll see.
All right, I think that's a good place to take a break, because I want to come back and I want to ask all of you, at this point, who does Michael Bloomberg hurt the most? We'll talk about that when we come back in just a minute. We're back with our panel of political experts. I'm going to go first to Ed Rollins. Ed, who does Michael Bloomberg hurt the most at this point?
Well, first, it's not determined who the Republican is. I assume it's going to be Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side, but that's just an assumption. We still have a very wide open race on our side. And I think it depends. One could be a traditional Sam's old running mate if he gets in the race, which I hear he is. Could be the old traditional conservative Republican. Obviously, Rudy Giuliani, who's leading polls by narrow margins, is a different kind of Republican. I think the critical thing here is the Republican Party has now dropped about 14 points from the 2004 election. We're down to about 25% self-identified Republicans. We don't want a candidate to take away those 14 or 15 points that are probably more moderate Republicans, and I think to a certain extent a Bloomberg can do that. Equally as important, in order to win the presidency, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, neither side has a plurality or a majority. You need those independent voters as becoming a larger and larger group, and I think to a certain extent Bloomberg attracts that independence. So I think at this point there's a better chance of him hurting a Republican candidate than there is the Democrat candidate.
Let me just detour here since you brought it up and ask Sam Waterston. Do you believe that, in fact, Fred Thompson is going to seek the Republican nomination, Mr. Waterston?
I don't have any personal information any more than any of the rest of us do, but it looks like it.
All right. And Ed Koch, who do you believe will be hurt most by the presence of Michael Bloomberg? Hillary Clinton or your old friend Rudy Giuliani?
Oh, there's no question the Republicans and Rudy Giuliani in particular would be hurt most by the entry of Mike Bloomberg. I believe that the Republicans are in total disorder, and they're so really in such a disorder that they're looking for a new candidate, and if they don't find one in the Republican ranks, they will look to someone like Mike Bloomberg.
Let me ask you, Sam Waterston, first. It seems to me that when you put a third choice up there, or even the possibility of a third choice, it could force both parties to move the hunt for votes more toward the center rather than to the base of each party. Is that one of your purposes here, just to try to moderate, to get more moderates involved?
It certainly is. The thing that Mr. Harris said about the Iraq War, you only have to take about a half a step backward to see that issues of that magnitude are greatly affected by process. And while the country may be divided about whether we should stay or leave, as far as wanting to work together for a wholesome and happy outcome for the United States and for the Middle East is concerned, there's a huge unanimity in the country about that, as there is a large consensus about other issues facing us like Social Security and global warming and you name it, right down the list. And what they're anxious for is a process that will lead to consensus and action.
Well, what about that? Let's just ask
That's why
John
there are
Harris.
so many independents.
Yeah. What about that, John? Do you see this as a moderating influence, or do you see a third party as something of a spoiler, as we saw with Ralph Nader the last time out? What do you think just the impact will be from the possibility of a third party candidate emerging?
Well, Bob, obviously it's an imponderable. That's why it's an interesting question. It's so unpredictable. But I think the very unpredictable nature of it puts me on a slightly different analysis than these gentlemen made. the larger environment right now overwhelmingly favors Democrats. Unpopular war, unpopular president, increasingly unpopular party on the Republican side. So anything that's a traditional two-party dynamic is going to favor the Democrats. A Bloomberg candidacy or some other third-party candidacy lends a big sort of volatile, unpredictable factor in that. So I'd have to say it's Democrats who shouldn't want that. They want a two-party race. They're poised to win it.
What about that, Ed Rollins?
Certainly, that's a good point. And as I said, I don't think you can predict at this point in time. I mean, Ross Perot drew from both sides. I think the critical thing that Bloomberg can do, though, is by March of this year, we'll probably have two potential nominees who will have spent millions and millions of dollars to get the nomination, and probably are out of money. Bloomberg can come in and have a 3 or 4 month period in which he can use a national campaign to talk about very significant issues. Where do we go after Iraq? How do we rebuild our military? What about the immigration question? Why shouldn't we debate that? What do we do about Social Security? Something he has really firsthand experience is 50% of kids don't graduate in urban schools today. He certainly made great efforts here in the city. We can talk about urban education and problems of health care delivery to the poor and other. So you could have this 3 or 4 month in which he's a catalyst for putting issues before the public. What Perot did is Perot talked about the deficit, and he forced the two candidates, Bush and Clinton, to talk about the deficit. And when Bill Clinton got elected, he tried to solve the deficit. So I think to a certain extent, it could be a very positive thing. And at the end of the day, it may not be enough to draw voters to him to give him 270 electoral votes, but he certainly can set an agenda for this country for the future in the campaign.
Mayor Koch, if you were, let's say, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, because you say right now you're for Senator Clinton,
Definitely.
How would you deal with a challenge from Mike Bloomberg?
Well, I believe that your campaign has to be what you give to the voters. I would urge her to do what I try to do as mayor, be a person of moderation. I refer to myself as a liberal with sanity. My enemies refer to me as the middle-class mayor. I say that's exactly what I want to be. And I believe that that is what the people of this country want. They want a leader whose responses are their responses, who believes in moderation, who understands the everyday problems that the ordinary citizen has. And that's what I would do, and that's what I think she is doing. You must not give in to the radicals of the left or the right in either party, and that is the danger always, because the radicals come out in larger numbers than they really reflect in the party, and you pay the price of succumbing to them in the general.
Let me ask you this: what would you do if you were mayor? If you were Rudy Giuliani, how would you handle Mike Bloomberg?
Well, Rudy Giuliani is already doing what he always does. He becomes angry and upset and mean-spirited. I mean, he's already attacked Bloomberg by saying, what do you mean you ran the city like a business? I did that. The truth of the matter is, I did that because I was there before them. I mean, I gave the city its first balanced budget in 15 years. But it is the nature of the Giuliani attack that will do him in every time.
John Harris, what would you add to what we just heard here? Any thoughts as you were listening to these gentlemen?
Look, one group that loves this story is our own business, the political press. There's no question this is going to be a huge consuming story as long as Bloomberg does this striptease. Virtually every candidate or politician I've ever seen to start a striptease usually finishes it. So he's going to get in, would be my guess, and we're going to have a field day. We'll find out if voters find it interesting.
This is maybe the first political panel we've had that nobody brought up the name Barack Obama. Should we be talking about Obama here this morning, John?
Well, look, what I think is interesting is Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are trying to appeal to the same constituency that Michael Bloomberg says is his. They're trying to do it from a Democratic perspective, but they're saying they can be problem solvers and can heal the divisiveness that has grown up in the country under the Bush presidency and under the Iraq War.
I want to ask Ed Rollins just to get his perspective as a Republican. Senator Clinton does seem to be solidifying her lead in the polls over Obama. He's still seen as this fresh, bright candidate who's bringing new ideas and certainly excitement to the campaign, but she just keeps on keeping on. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think she's got a tremendous staff. I think she's someone of real substance. I think Obama did her a great favor. I think he took all the oxygen out of the air, and some very significant candidates running for the Democratic nomination, like Biden and Dodd and others, Richardson, couldn't move through the Obama fog there. And I think to a certain extent, Obama doesn't have quite the experience to basically contrast with her. But I think Obama has bought young people and a new energy. And hopefully those people, if he doesn't win the nomination, don't get turned off and stay home, that they go somewhere. And I think at the end of the day, those are potential Bloomberg supporters too.
Sam Waterston, I have about 30 seconds left here, but Chuck Hagel, there's been a lot of talk of this maverick Republican Chuck Hagel somehow winding up on a ticket with Michael Bloomberg. Would that be a great ticket for your group?
It certainly would be interesting, but it would be for the people to decide. I would just like to add to all this conversation that has been going before that it is Unity 08's purpose to make sure that the center, which has been ably described here many times, is represented. If one of the two existing parties breathes all the air in the center, then Unity 08's mission will have been accomplished. But can they credibly do that given the process that is used nowadays to nominate them?
All right, I think that's a very good place to stop. Well, this is certainly a conversation that will be continuing, not just here, but in a lot of places. We enjoyed having all of you this morning. I'll be back with a final word in just a minute. Great. Finally today, well, I have let you down, and I think it's best to just admit it and move on. Face the Nation did not get the big interview with Paris Hilton. I feel terrible about it. I haven't felt so low since one of our competitors broke into programming to report that the embalming of Anna Nicole Smith's body had begun. Getting scooped on a big story is never fun, not then, not ever. And we never got to first base on that story either, which is why we tried to be competitive on this one. We held strategy sessions on how to stay ahead on the Paris story. In the finest network tradition, we blamed each other for not getting the interview. We even leaked the infighting to competitors, but nothing worked. All those big-time bookers dangled all those deals in front of Paris's family, and we were just out of our league. Heck, we couldn't even figure out what league we were in. As Paris herself might have summed it up, whatever. When the deals with the other networks fell through, my friend Larry King got the interview, and to show what a big deal that is, this morning the New York Times took note of it on page 1. There's nothing left for me to do but stop making excuses and fess up. The truth is, I never asked Paris Hilton to be on Face the Nation, and for one reason. I couldn't think of anything I wanted to ask her. Can you? That's it for us. We'll see you next week, right here on Face the Nation.